Well, good evening for take two of the first podcast episode in the Heal Our Culture project. My name is Wes Fryer. It is January the 29th, 2024, and I'm here in Matthews, North Carolina with Shelly Fryer. How are you?
I'm doing great. This is a beautiful evening, and it's nice to sit here and just do some reflecting.
Well, I appreciate you being a good sport and doing this. But we participated this past weekend in a very powerful event. The first time we've gone to an event like this, it was a racial healing conference that was hosted by Caldwell Presbyterian Church here in Charlotte. And what we'd like to do basically are three things. We want to observe and sort of summarize and reflect for you what we experienced. What was it like? What was the interaction like? Second of all, we want to do takeaways from the event. We've got a variety of different notes. And then lastly, next steps. And to give you a quick summary of the Heal Our Culture project, we believe that we are called to be cultural healers, not culture warriors. We seek to amplify ideas, practices, and people who are acting to heal scars and wounds in our culture, promoting cultures of respect, care, kindness, forgiveness, understanding, and love. And you can find more about this project on healourculture.org. And there is a resource site that I started last year that has a wealth of different resources. But today we want to talk about the Racial Healing Conference. So Shelly, I guess how would you explain to people how things were set up? And I've got the name and the author, I think, of our... You've got it? Awesome. All right, well, set the stage. What was this? It started Friday night and continued on Saturday.
Well, Wes and I in our church have been on a journey. There is a committee at our church, the ARC committee, and it's the Anti-Racism Council. And this was the first racial healing conference that they've done. And it was absolutely wonderful. They brought in an author from Washington. Her name is Kimberly Yolanda Williams. Kimberly Yolanda Williams, and she has written a book called Dear White Woman, Please Come Home. So I just started this book yesterday, actually, and we'll talk about that later. But she and her wife are really into healing and helping people become comfortable talking about racism and anti-racism. She started the whole conference. We went on Friday night, and it was kind of a get to know you. It was a dinner. It was a kind of a soft start, really. And we talked about our names and the origins of our names and how powerful names are. We talked about how important it was to be seen and to be heard. We were there to learn and to listen to each other. And so she did some activities to kind of help us get to know each other, to kind of set the stage, knowing that we would need that the following day to do some deep. I mean, you can't talk about racism without experiencing a myriad of emotions. And this was a multicultural group. And so she really did a good job, I felt, of working the group, getting to know their names, calling people by names, including people, also just respecting and getting to know us, I think was really important, because we were there to do some serious discussion and talk and learn from each other. And I think she did a good job on Friday night of kind of doing the icebreaker, but not the funsy, cutesy ones, but really an opportunity to get to know each other. What were your feelings on that?
Well, I really liked how she started off with community norms. This past fall, one of the members of our ARC Council, Kimbo, was the facilitator of a 9-week course that we took online via Zoom called Confronting Whiteness. And again, this is part of anti-racism work that our church is engaged in and members of our church. So this course is actually offered through Myers Park Baptist Church here in Charlotte. And we'll talk when we discuss next steps about the conference that they're hosting next weekend, which we're planning to attend. But the community norms, I'll include a link in the show notes for this podcast. And I think I'll probably put this on YouTube too, actually, as a podcast. It's risky to talk about this stuff, right? And one of the important reasons why I think we were there and why this was hosted is because we live in very polarized times, but we need to have conversations to try and bridge gaps to understand how people come from and live in different cultures and the ways in which we can better understand each other and seek to heal individually, to heal as a church family, to heal as a community. So the community norms really set us up to be listening to each other, to assuming good intention, debating ideas, and not the individual. There were 9 different norms, and I really liked that. And I think the next time, and maybe I'll even do this for face-to-face classes, but for sure for an online class, I think it's really great to have those norms to set those up. We all had a packet in a little notebook, and it had a variety of different things in it. One of them was a picture of an iceberg, where, of course, the majority of the iceberg is below the waterline. But there were different things written on it, and she asked us to respond to those. And some of this was just word association. The first thing that comes to your mind: food, language, flags, festivals, fashion, holidays, music, performance, dance, arts and crafts, literature, games. But then there were things relating to communication styles and rules, notions of things like friendship or cleanliness or leadership, concepts that we have of self, of class, of family, of sex, of fairness, justice, attitudes, and then approaches. And she called that surface culture and deep culture. She also had a poem that she liked to start our sections with, and we actually started off sort of with a little bit of a meditation for each section. There were some academic documents, which we didn't really get into a tremendous amount, but talking about a racial identity development scale. And then the one that I really worked on, and I'm looking forward to following up with, is creating your own racial biography and thinking about that. There was a handout page that had a big key.
I want to talk about the key.
You want to talk about the key? Okay. So anyway, it was well facilitated. We were set up in table groups of probably 4 to 6 people. I liked how she had one seat at each table with a reserved page on it, and that was so that she could come join each table, and so she would circulate around. And she really provided quite a bit of thinking time and working time. So it wasn't just a fire hose of information. It was some information, it was stories, it was a lot of personal stories about her and her life growing up and her life today. But it gave everyone some chances to not only do some deep thinking and some writing and some reflecting, but then also sharing a little bit with the group and with partners. And then we had some time throughout the conference or the retreat to do some group sharing. So are you ready for takeaways, or you have any more to add to the observations?
No, I think definitely I'm ready for some of the takeaways. What I did like that she did, Wes kind of started talking about the key, is that you can't talk about racial healing, you can't talk about differences without having some emotions, quite a bit of emotions, really. And in some cases, possibly some conflict. And so she gave us some ways ahead of time, some strategies that we could use to recognize when we were becoming emotional, and some strategies of how to deal with that. And that was kind of the key that she gave us, and we were to write down. And I think it was important. She gave us something. She said, when I become defensive, I am doing my very best to protect the little child inside of me who wants nothing more than to belong. So preparing us for, there might be some situations where we might get defensive, or we might get hurt, or we might, and so we spent some time about exploring what does that feel like. For me, it felt like I get immediately hot, and I can feel myself get a little sweaty, and I start talking fast, and my heart beats fast. And, those are just some defense mechanisms that my body has when I begin to feel defensive. And so she helped us discover ways that we could take care of that. I could tell myself that I'm okay, or, what is it that I need to hear to feel better, so that we could do that for, maybe somebody that we love, but also that we could do that for ourselves, because there are some many opportunities to get emotional. And she said, even when we're emotional, even when we're in conflict with each other, we still need to stay in relationship with each other. And so in order to maintain that relationship, it's important to know how to protect yourself and others through that. And so I thought that was really good. I think I think that was good. She did a lot of preparation for that. One of my takeaways, and that I'm still kind of grappling with, I suppose, is, and she would say this, when that which is normal to me lands poorly on that which is normal to you, then we end up in conflict. So if my normal, the way I was raised, the way I was parented, the way that I went to school, when my normal is different from your normal, then we can have some conflict that. Or when that which is normal to you lands poorly on that which is normal to me, then you and I end in conflict. So I think what she was preparing the groundwork for is that we were talking about cultures, and what is normal in one culture, and I do quote, air quote, normal in one culture may not be normal in another culture. And so we have to be really careful and learn about each other, so that when situations like that arise, we can remain in relationship even though we may have some initial conflict over that. That was a big takeaway for me.
So definitely there was so much talk about culture, and some of that culture had to do with race, but other parts of that had to do with gender. We had, this was powerful. She talked about the expectations and norms of society, and how people who are white, especially people who are male, have a privileged place. And so there are people in situations which would perceive her as a woman to take a step back, and as an African American to take a step back, and as a gay woman to take a step back. And so understanding and thinking about the norms that we have within our culture, how we tend as people to be judgmental. You mentioned defensiveness. I liked how she recognized and asked us all to recognize that defensiveness comes from that sense of protection and safety, and that is a normal kind of response. But I think a lot of what she was calling us to do was to be more aware of cultural assumptions, the ways in which we can often prejudge people based on just one or a few external signs or signals that are sent. And part of healing our culture, and I think actually becoming better humans, I think that's part of the goal here, is to be a better human, is to recognize that we come from such different places. We haven't walked in everyone's shoes. And so we need to find ways with our language, and even just with the ways in which I guess we approach people and look at people and interact. We need to be really aware of the biases and the tendencies that there are in our society and our culture. as she said, to basically sort of show up as our ancestors would have. And
we tend to do that.
We tend to do that,
We
right?
tend to do
right,
that,
and we need to
yes.
be aware of the fact that we would tend to show up the way we were raised, the way the culture tells us to respond,
Whether
and,
we want to or not.
right, that would be involuntary. And part of what we are encouraged to do is to interrogate these assumptions, these biases, these cultural norms. And there were a number of things that she talked about encouraging us to be ready to divorce and step away from. I definitely think that in each culture that we come from, I think that there are, redeeming aspects, and then there's going to be things that we might want to completely divorce and walk away from, or things that we would just not want to replicate. And you can think of that in the context of just parenting and your family that you grew up in. But I think that the encouragement for us, this is where I saw a lot of media literacy connections. And as I'm thinking about cultural healing, yes, racial healing, but cultural healing too, media is so powerful, and media messages. And one of the things that I try to help my students do, and I try to do myself, is to interrogate that media. Who created that? What do we think their purpose was? Who was the audience? How might that be trying to make us feel? And so this whole idea of sort of, putting on lenses of critical thinking about the norms that we have around us and the ways that we're encouraged to think, which some of those may be great, but others might not be fair, and they could actually be harmful. As a media literacy middle school teacher myself, I definitely saw a lot of that kind of encouragement, which I certainly resonated with. What did you take away from the keys? Was that hard? For me, it made me really think about some of the most traumatic experiences of my life, because she asked us, well, what is the key that you needed at that time? What are the words that you needed someone to say to you that would, she had us write that on the key.
I know.
Well, I know you talked about that, right. But I don't know. That was hard for me. It made me think about trauma, I know this, or I've had this reinforced at other times. We just have no idea what kinds of trauma and experiences other people have gone through in the past, maybe going through right now. And this is something else that I think you certainly feel called to, is trauma-informed teaching and becoming more aware of how do we minister to, how do we communicate with, how do we support and be a friend to other people who have experienced trauma. And so I found some of that sort of trauma-informed encouragement, I guess, to be sensitive and aware and intentional in messages that she was sharing.
Yeah, I think that was really important, that we have some tools that we have to respond in situations. Another tool and strategy that she gave us was that when we are confronted, or when we come into a situation where we disagree with someone, or how they're reacting in a certain situation, or questions that they may be posing, she gave us this strategy called Petra, where if somebody just says something kind of that we just disagree with, or that really, is to pause and take some time, even create a diversion, to give yourself some time instead of just reacting, to be able to pause and make a plan, and also have empathy, because everybody is in a different place on their journey. And there are people who are just learning about racism and the effects that it has on our society and our culture, and we need to have empathy for that. We can use that as an opportunity to teach, to explain. not to shove anything down anybody's throat, or certainly not to tell them, well, you're wrong and I'm right, but use that as an opportunity to teach about, well, in my situation, I've learned, or whatever, review, go through and review how that situation come up and how that might happen again, and then just keep doing that. I think as we know better, we do better, to quote, Maya Angelou. And so I think we're all on a different journey with this, and some people may not be on the journey at all. But we need to realize that we need to remain in relationship even in the midst of that conflict. And so what somebody gives us, we don't have to reflect exactly that back. I had made a note here that says the culture of Christ should trump all other conflict. That we are called to love one another, and so I think it's really important that we learn to pause, create a diversion, come up with some kind of plan on how we're going to respond, but respond in love and empathy.
Okay, well, we'll talk a little bit about next steps, but I'm going to say one more thing about identity and one more thing about this podcast and this project. There are so many things going on in the world that are really, really tough, and filling our mind with current events can have a real toxic effect upon us. I kind of saw this with my grandmother, Trudy Henley, when she would sort of just watch CNN News, all day long. And, this was, I guess, throughout the 1990s. And, I think we need to be aware of kind of what we're filling our minds with, and filling our minds, remembering that there are folks out there, out in our world, doing good work that is healing work, that is not polarizing work, that encourages people to grapple with tough questions and tough situations, but bringing people together in an atmosphere of respect and, mutual commitment to shared values of community and listening. It's so important. So who are you? Who are we? These are big questions. And as we consider, and this is a moving target because, who we are today is going to be different than who we considered ourselves to be 10 years ago or 20 years ago or whatever. That was part of the work, I think, that we were called to, is to consider who we are and who we are as individuals. And I think one of the big goals here is to live in community, to find ways to understand each other better, to be better humans with each other, and like I said at the outset, really to be cultural healers. So, Shelly, what do you think your next steps are as you consider not only racial healing, but I guess cultural healing, and then the intersection of these different things? I know that you feel called to some different things. What do you feel called to do at this point in your next steps here?
Well, that's a lot of big words. And right now I'm just like, what's my next thing? So I did go ahead and start her book. And so I'm working through that. Wes mentioned trauma-informed teaching. I do feel very called to that. And preparing, there's not a lot of training that teachers get on that. And so finding out about it for myself, I have some experience with that. But maybe, making that more available to other teachers. I think that's really important too, because through all of these talks, I realize, teachers have a lot of power in everybody's lives. And I mean, they have power for good and they have power for evil. And I think it's really important that we learn to exercise that power carefully. especially into the lives of children who are still developing and forming and being shaped by what they see and by what they hear. And I think we need to be very intentional about the words that we're using with and around children, so that they can know that they matter and that they are important to our society and to each other. And we want to raise good humans. So I do think, that's kind of my short-term and some of my long-term goals.
So one of the things, in addition to recording this podcast and getting this project launched as a podcast, as well as at this point a set of resources, is I'm going to write up a summary on a blog post of my notes. I think it's really important that we have the courage to share our journey when it comes to wanting to be cultural healers. Situations are very different. We moved from Oklahoma City almost 2 years ago here to Charlotte, North Carolina. We have no idea where you are in space and time listening to these words and to this podcast, but there are different groups and organizations that are doing this kind of work. And so in sharing awareness and resources and links, people who are interested in this work can engage in this work. One of the things that I think is really important is cultural literacy. And we all now who are alive today, over a certain age, not super, super young, we know about George Floyd. We know about the Black Lives Matter movement that just happened a couple years ago during COVID. But there have been many deaths, there have been bombings, there have been all kinds of things that have happened. And so one of the ideas that I have used the Knight Foundation's timeline tool before to build basically a multimedia timeline. And so I actually started that when I was, at the retreat this weekend, and then I found some timelines. But we learned about the Children's March, right? This last week. Or because of the Martin Luther King holiday and some of the curriculum that you all had at school, and we've watched some YouTube videos, and it's been amazing. And I heard a little of this, but I did not have the depth of understanding about it. No. And so
I don't think I had ever heard that story in Birmingham, Alabama, and how pivotal the children were. Thousands of children that came out.
Who walked out of school.
Who made a huge impact.
Yes. Who had the courage
civil rights movement.
Who had the courage and were able to do things that their adult parents could not do. And so and these were not things that we learned in school. Mm-mm. I think that it is incumbent upon each of us as citizens to know our history, and some of it's tough. There's a lot of it that's tough. And so that's also why I think it's important to maintain hope and to share stories of hope and encouragement, right? Because it is possible to turn on the news and to listen to certain voices within our society and culture and just think, man, this country, this world is just going to heck in a handbasket, and there's no hope. And that is not true. That is not true at all. There absolutely is hope, and there are people doing great work. But part of the work that we're called to do, like I said, is to know our history. So I'm going to work on this timeline. The other thing I'm going to work on is an update to my racial autobiography. This was something I had not ever heard of before until we took this Confronting Whiteness class. And I'm going to try and include links to each of the resources that we're mentioning in this podcast. So I'll include them in the show notes on the podcast, and I'll also try to include the links in the description on YouTube as well. But I think I had like a 20-minute racial autobiography that I made during our Confronting Whiteness class the first time. As someone who likes videos and digital storytelling, I want to do something that's shorter, that's more concise, that uses some photos. And so I also sketched that out at the conference. I wrote a little I wrote a little storyboard of what that might look like. And so I'm going to try to use this as a catalyst for me to make that and to share that, because I have definitely experienced the power of video and the power of stories and the power of storytelling when you bring those together to really educate but also touch the heart. And I think that those are important elements of this work. So to kind of close up, do you want to say where we're headed this weekend at Myers Park Baptist? Okay, well, I'll just say there is a Confronting Whiteness conference. This is the third annual conference hosted by Myers Park Baptist. And if you just Google Confronting Whiteness, Myers Park Baptist, Charlotte, you can find their website. But the theme of this year's conference is the case for reparations, which is a very challenging topic. It's not one that I know a lot about. And so I think that we individually and together are going to have to gauge, sort of how much is what's the speed and the intake with which we want to process this. I think we both feel strongly that we're called on a journey of faith and a journey of learning, and this conference is a part of that journey that we are on. But I think that we all need to tread lightly and carefully and have grace for ourselves and grace for others, because these topics can definitely be emotional and powerful. Unfortunately, I think there are people who don't want these conversations to happen. And while we all are entitled to our opinions, it's important for us to study history, and it's important for us to seek to be empathetic and to be better neighbors and better friends and better members of our communities. And so I think that work of cultural healing is super important. And, no matter what happens politically tomorrow or in the next 6 months or the next year, I think this is work that is important. So we don't have a planned outro. Maybe we'll record one, but any closing thoughts that you have to wrap up?
No, I just think it's a really important journey, and I'm glad we're here. I think this is a part of the reason we were called to North Carolina. So.
Okay, well, we want to encourage you to visit healourculture.org. We have a Facebook page that you can follow that will continue to share new podcast episodes. I don't have a schedule yet. I think as events happen, hopefully we can get a couple of these out per month. But the community on Facebook will be a place. I guess I don't know if they have a group. I just have a page to follow right now, so you can follow the page. But connect. Let us know if there are ideas that you have about resources that should be added to the resource page. Folks that we might want to interview. There are some fantastic organizations that we've learned about, and we're just continuing to try and reach out and learn more and see where we need to plug in, because nobody can do it all, but we can all do
something.
A little bit. Yeah.
That's right.
All right. Thanks.